What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I am joined by comic creator Stuart Moore. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am super excited. You have had a long career in comics, and you have a new series out from Ahoy called Highball, and hilarious, awesome book. I want to jump into that, but I always like to ask my creators when I have them on the show, how did you get into creating comics?
Well, I always loved comics. I was always writing stuff, but I got into comics probably the stupidest way possible. I was a book editor, and I answered an ad at DC Comics, it was an ad. It turned out it was an ad for the editorial group at DC Comics that became Vertigo a couple of years later, working with Karen Berger. So I got involved that way first. It was a while later that I went freelance and started really writing seriously, which is most of what I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, because you've done a lot of writing. I know you've written for DC, you've written for Marvel, did the Iron Man, you did Namor, you've done them all and stuff like that. So how did then your journey as an editor at DC kind of open the door for you to start to write comics?
Well, it was it opened a door, and it also kept some doors closed at the same time, because at the time I was at DC, editors were not encouraged to write for the company, and they were actually forbidden by terms of employment to write for someone else, to write comics for someone else anyway. So I didn't actually do any writing for DC until after I left. I had a position at Marvel Knights for a couple of years after that, just about 20 years ago. That was a lot more open. I was free to write for other people. That was just a different situation. And that was when I really started doing it. But that was what I really wanted to do. And I'm very proud of a lot of the stuff I edited at DC, including books like Preacher and Transmetropolitan, the Books of Magic, stuff like that. But I really wanted to do my own stuff, and I'm glad that's where things ended up.
So you got to then start to do a lot of freelance writing. Where was it for you where you're like, okay, I'm doing this full-time writing? Was it right as soon as you got released from, doing editing, you're like, I'm doing it full-time now? Or
I left Marvel Knights at a point when Marvel was a little bit chaotic. We'd kind of restructured a lot of things, relaunched a lot of books. It was very exciting. It was wild stuff, but things were changing again, and it just sort of made sense for me to leave. But I really did it because I wanted to write. And again, it wasn't really like there weren't a lot of openings to do that at Marvel while I was still working on those books. So I just sort of took the plunge. I had a few jobs with a few assignments with Dark Horse. I wrote a couple of novels for a British company called Black Library that's mostly known for Warhammer. I did a few things here and there, but it was really when Steve Wacker at DC took a chance on me for some Justice League Adventures stories first, and then Firestorm in around 2005, I think it was, that things started to take off and get a little more regular. And I've always done some editorial and publishing consulting work on the side too. I do that for Ahoy on a freelance basis. I handle their publishing operations, keep the schedule, work with distributors, things like that, purely on a freelance basis.
Yeah. So I was going to ask then how you got connected with Ahoy. I'm assuming through relationships with Tom and stuff over at DC Vertigo and things like that.
Yeah. Tom and I worked together. We were two of the original editors on the Vertigo line, and we've been friends for a long time. And he just called me up one day and said, hey, we're starting this company. Do you want to be involved? And at first, we talked about me editing some books, editing some of his books, editing something else. I showed them my book, Captain Ginger, which they liked and wanted to make part of the line. Then what happened was we were working with a guy named Sven Larson, who's a VP at Marvel now. And he was helping us put together the initial production and marketing plan. He's got a lot of experience and all that. And he and I went down to Diamond to pitch the company to Diamond Comics in person in Baltimore. It went really well. They accepted us on the spot. The next day he called me and said, I'm going to Marvel. So that left a little hole at Ahoy. And we thought about what to do with it for a while, and we brought in Darren Bennett, who's brilliant to handle the production. And in terms of the organizational and not quite marketing, but like top level planning stuff, it kind of made, I'm the organized one in the group. It just sort of made more sense for me to step up and do that.
So you got your, you were started to work on helping them out with at Ahoy there. And Captain Ginger was your first, right? Because then you also had Bronze Age Boogie.
Yes.
Okay. So where is it for you? How do you come up with your ideas, especially these are some out there ideas which are awesome and great, and I've enjoyed the story so much. Like, how's that process for you?
All right, I can run down those 3 books because they all have different answers. Captain Ginger was something I had been working with June Brigman before on a comic called The 99, which you probably haven't heard of because it was produced here, but mostly for the international market, and it was intended to foster sort of international friendship and peace, and it was about a team of kids, each of whom had a unique power. And June was, she kind of did all the character designs. She illustrated a few of the stories. She did a lot of the covers. And at one point we were doing a story that I don't think even appeared, but it was an illustrated text piece, I think for a bank in Dubai, something like that. And I wrote a scene set in a cat sanctuary they had over there. And there was a single illustration, and June just drew it with cats everywhere, like cats climbing the walls, climbing the doorway, all over the main characters, all over everyone. And they all had, each cat had its own personality. Like they were all like snapping at each other. Some of them looked happy. Some of them looked like really upset. Some of them looked really like nervous. And I thought, So I just sort of filed that away. And eventually I realized there's a lot of sort of imagery and graphics on the internet about cats in outer space, but I'd never seen a really full-fledged like story about it. There was one animated cartoon like maybe 25 years ago, and it was pretty forgettable, I think. But I just put these 2 things together, and I thought, well, this is the perfect June Brigman project. And I approached her about it. It was the first thing I ever created specifically for one artist. And thank God she wanted to do it, because I don't know what I would have done with it otherwise. But it's been a great sort of collaboration at every stage. So.
Well, it's interesting how, like you said, like you created it just for your artist, because each cat in that series has just you can see the personalities, you can they're so unique and diverse, and it makes for just a great team book, even if it wasn't just with cats as the leads.
Yeah, I mean that, and again, most of the credit for that goes to June. I try not to hammer in too much. I did invent a minor character based on a rescue cat that she had just adopted. I hadn't even seen him, but I'd heard his name, which was Buddy Cat, and I just made him like the litter box officer who has to train everybody to clean the ship. And she said, "Oh, that's perfect." And he turned out to be this like cross-eyed mess, like that. And I thought, "Oh, that's even better than I imagined." So that's Captain Ginger. Yeah. Bronze Age Boogie just basically came out of my sort of love of 1970s comics, and I wanted to mix up a whole lot of. That was really when, especially at Marvel, that was really when all sorts of like heroic adventure genres came into the whole thing as the line expanded. They started doing Conan, they started doing War of the Worlds, Kill Raven, they did all this crazy stuff, Planet of the Apes. And I wanted to sort of put all that in a blender and just sort of mix it up and see what I could come up with. Highball was inspired by a friend of mine. I've told this story a lot, but a friend of mine who I went out drinking with one night with a bunch of people, and we just started playing darts. And the more my friend drank, the more bullseyes he hit. Like he would just his aim just started getting better and better and better. And I thought, wow, there's something here. So I just turned that into a space pilot. I just made that a space pilot. And Highball is a little bit more, I would say Highball is a little more arch. It's a little closer to farce than most of what I've done for Ahoy. It's a little more out there. But hopefully it has real characters who grow and evolve as the series goes on.
Yeah, and because it's so interesting. Like it seems like, at least with your stuff at Ahoy so far, you say in the science fiction kind of realm of, with your books, but they're all unique in the aspects of, between the, first two volumes of Captain Ginger, and then the first volume of Bronze Age Boogie, and then
Yeah.
getting to check out issue 1 of Highball so far. Like, they have their unique brands of characters and how they're designed. It's just been really entertaining.
Well, thanks. And I do worry about that a little bit. Like I try to keep the worlds of Captain Ginger and Highball as different as I can. The artists, of course, help a lot with that, because Fred Harper also has a very, like, a little more of an extreme sensibility, I would say. Like, just where June's work is just elegant and classical and beautiful. So yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad that sounds like it's working.
It is. So, well, let's talk a little bit more about Highball. The idea, like you said, where it came from your friend is just so funny, because how, like, life, art imitates life and things like that. Yeah. So how did you get connected with Fred then? Because, like, I know you said the art is, it really separates it. They're completely different art styles than Captain Ginger and some of your other stuff. So how did this team for Highball get created?
Well, Fred lives in New York City like I do, and he did some work with Vertigo back in the day, but we didn't really know each other. Like, I probably said hi to him a couple of times. And he started doing some other work for Ahoy, and it was actually the writer Annie Nocenti who brought him in, because she's friends with Tom Peyer. I can't remember if she's done any work with Ahoy yet. She should, if she hasn't. But she's friends with him. She sort of brought him to Tom's attention, and then Fred drew a series called Snelson, which is probably the most extreme thing Ahoy has published. It's about a 90s stand-up comic who tries to make a comeback in all the worst, most disastrous ways possible. It's written by Paul Constant. It's really funny, very much for adults. But the way I got connected with him was earlier this year. We were at Ahoy. We were putting together a series of one-shots tied into the series The Wrong Earth, which Tom had created with Jamal Egel. And I pitched one that they liked. We needed an artist for that. Tom thought Fred would be good. And Fred, he did a gorgeous job. And he colored that himself, which unfortunately he didn't have time to do on Highball. But that was called The Wrong Earth Purple. And that was my tribute to the 80s and funk music and the sort of general aesthetic of the Michael Keaton Batman movies, that sort of thing.
So that's
how it hooked up, and then we moved on to Highball from there.
Okay, that makes sense, because I read all the one shots of The Wrong Earth, and actually was at a Comic-Con back in July where Jerry Ordway was there and got the variant cover sign.
that was our book. Yeah.
Yep.
It'll be in the trade paperback, which will be out in October.
Yeah, it's a that whole series is great, and so I love that series then is kind of what got you and Fred connected to then come out with Highball. And so with this process for you of, when you have these ideas, do you have like usually a close story in mind, or do you kind of just say, like, here's my concept, I want to see how far I can continue writing this, or is it more open-ended?
Again, it's very different depending on the project, and it's different also depending on whether I have a publisher in mind. Or, like, June and I were playing with Captain Ginger for about 4 years before we took it to Ahoy, before Ahoy existed, actually. And I had mentioned it to a few people. She was doing sample art. At one point, she wanted to color it herself. So we were sort of playing with it. I had written in the case of both Captain Ginger and Highball, before we got very far at all, I sat down and wrote a sample script, which is not always done. But in both cases, I just wanted to see if I could make it work, And with Captain Ginger, I could tell I needed a longer than usual first issue. Highball, it was a matter of, can I fit this into a normal, more or less, I think I went to 22 pages instead of 20, but a more or less full, regular sized story. I just wanted to see if the whole thing would fit, if the rhythms of the dialogue would make sense, if the humor would come together. So I kind of like to do that with an original project. It's a little different with something like The Wrong Earth, or like the books I've done at DC and Marvel,
Right.
where usually you pitch something and they commission it and they trust you to pull it off, and you work with your editor as you need to.
Right. That makes sense a lot there. I'm curious. I want to just ask, part of the writing process. When I was reading Bronze Age Boogie, I noticed that in each issue you have a section where you basically have a page where it's dialogue. Like, where did that kind of idea, like narration, come about?
That I that's an element of the book that I I think I decided after the fact was a mistake. But
Oh, sorry.
no, it's okay. It's okay. No, I like talking about like I think it stopped readers dead a little bit. It's actually a direct homage down to the ugly typeface. It's a direct take from a lot of Marvel books in the 70s. A lot of the more trippy and intellectual Marvel books like Killraven or Howard the Duck or even the Defenders, like when Steve Gerber was writing it, would do that. They would literally stop the story, and it was a way of a lot of those writers were very had really nice prose styles and were able to write that way really well. But it was a way of, I think it was a way of moving the story along a lot really fast. Like you could actually fit a lot into one of those pages, and especially if you needed to get a bit more into the heads of the characters, like it was a way of doing that as well. So I thought I would try that, especially since I was stuffing that series as full of ideas and plot twists and concepts as I possibly could, and that helped me move things along. I wonder if it was a little bit of a roadblock, like in the end. I don't know if it worked. If we had gone ahead with the sequel, I was gonna stop that. And also, people didn't remember those pages, so like nobody commented on them the way I thought. Nobody got the joke really.
Well, I was just so curious because
Yeah.
didn't grow up reading comics in the 70s, so I wasn't familiar with that. And I was just like, this is such an interesting idea to, like you said, to tell more story, because you have a lot packed into that series. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this makes sense that you had to have some time where you can just say, there it is. I didn't realize it was
I love doing it. I love doing it, and I love seeing what Alberto Ponticelli would come back with, because he does just beautiful single illustrations. So that was fun. I'm glad we did it. I wouldn't do it again.
Now, Highball, you working with Fred, and I know you had Lee also doing coloring for it. How did is this, when you're doing a book, especially maybe at Ahoy, is it more where you just kind of work with some of your connections, or is it like Tom and some of the others also hop in and say, have you thought about using this person?
All of the above.
Okay.
I think I brought Lee into Ahoy. I hadn't actually worked with him. He kind of came into things after I stopped editing books, really. But I knew him. I knew he was a good colorist, and he was a guy who, frankly, got a little bit pigeonholed as the fast guy when he's actually really, really good. And so he started doing some work for Tom, and he colored Fred's previous Ahoy title, Snelson. I knew they worked well together, and Fred and Lee was open for work, so it was just a natural.
So you have this concept. Is it a kind of a end all story of, is it 4 or 5 issues, and then kind of see if, or there more to explore of the world of Highball?
Yeah, both. The initial storyline runs 5 issues.
Okay.
And that tells an episodic but more or less complete story. Issues 1, 2, and 3 are all fairly self-contained adventures, but that build up to the climax in issues 4 and 5. What the book is really kind of about is it seems to be about this guy who drinks in order to sharpen his reflexes so he can hit the target. But it's really about a guy who drinks so he doesn't have to think about the consequences of what he's doing. And it's in the course of it, he has this friend named Chuck, who's a fellow pilot. Highball, he has another name, but his call sign is Highball. That's what they call him when he's out. And Chuck's name is Chuck, but his call sign is Chuck. So Chuck is he's just he's not happy with anything. He's not happy with the Space Corp. He's not happy with his place and things. He's not happy that there are these aliens called the Mentok who basically run everything to do with Earth, just because they kind of bullied us and we let them. Like there's no really good, they're not really good at it. Like we don't, but we just sort of let them take over because we're lazy. So Chuck's solution to this is to get involved in a whole bunch of really terrible, basically cryptocurrency related conspiracies. So Chuck is the guy with Highball's like really searching for an answer. Like here, there's an incident in the first issue that really makes him doubt everything. And Chuck thinks he has all the answers, but he knows all the right questions, but he has all the wrong answers. And Highball gets like slowly drawn into his orbit, and that's the story of the first storyline. Is how that all resolves itself. That said, there's a much bigger universe to the series. There are alien races. There are 6 main alien races, counting humans, in the story, and there's some of them we barely get to see in the first 5 issues. So yeah, I could do a lot more with that if we get to do more.
That's so cool, to hear that kind of the layers of the story aspect of, digging deeper into, the background of why they do what they do. And, because like you said, at face value, it looks like he just is drinking because, well, he can throw darts better, metaphorically, but it also then makes a lot of sense because, right off the bat, without giving anything away, something pretty big happens at the end of the first issue that you just kind of like.
Yeah, something cosmic big happens and something personal big happens at the same time. And the combination kind of jars him a bit, makes him start rethinking what's happening. And the events of the next 2 issues contribute to that as well.
Yeah. So how did your time as an editor prep you and help you with creating comic books, especially on the writing side?
I worked with a lot of really top flight writers. I worked with Garth Ennis a lot. I was the original editor on Preacher. I worked with Brian Michael Bendis quite a bit at Marvel on Daredevil and Alias, which was Jessica Jones, the original title. I think I really got a sense of what the tricks are behind the scenes, what works, what doesn't. I'm actually, one thing I'm doing in Highball is I'm doing a series of annotations on each issue in the letter column, just where I comment on them. And I just wrote the ones for issue 3, and there's one scene in issue 3 where I think I was channeling Bendis a little bit, which I don't usually do. Like my style is very different from that. And I've worked with him enough to know that channeling him is usually a bad idea because he's kind of a genius, but he's got these tricks to the way his dialogue work that are not obvious. And it's very hard to imitate. Like it's something I would advise writers not to imitate generally. But in this one scene, I could tell like the rhythm of it just sort of felt like something he would do a little more. So I think in a large sense, it really helped me internalize the way comics are paced, the way different writers do things. And in a smaller sense, it gave me some tricks to draw on when maybe things aren't working, or when I'm cramped for space and have to figure out how to fit a scene into less space than I'd like. Things like that.
Yeah, makes sense. And I noticed something else, that you've done where you've done a lot of writing of, for example, like the Civil War Illustrated edition, where it's adapted from, the novel that was there. How's that process different for you when you're taking something that's already been created and you're adapting it?
Well, I've written a number of Marvel novels, and I'm actually working on another one now. And some of them are adaptations, and some of them are original material. The adaptations, it really depends on the original source material. Civil War was and the same was true, actually. I did an adaptation of X-Men, the Dark Phoenix saga, just a couple of years ago. And both of those are big, sprawling epics like that ran over dozens of comics, really. And in that case, you have to make some decisions. And the decisions are based on how many characters do I want to introduce? How much room do I have to really to flesh out a character, so that they're not just a name, like or a costume coming in to do one thing. And in both those cases, I had to make decisions like that. There are other adaptations, and one that comes to mind is one that I edited that I didn't write, which was Iron Man Extremis. the original material was by Warren Ellis, and Marie Javins, who's now editor-in-chief of DC, wrote the novel. And I worked on that with Marie, and that was a rather short 5 or 6 issue storyline that had to be expanded quite a lot. So it really depends. And I've done a lot of adaptation work. I've done comics to books. I've done books to comics. I've done film to comics. I've done film to books. And it really always depends on the initial source material and how much space you have, like how much room you have to go along. I did a graphic novel for DC's Ink line, their young adult line, called Batman Nightwalker, that was based on a prose novel by Marie Lu, and that was a great, very smooth job. The art is gorgeous by Chris Wildgoose, but also it was a fairly short novel and a fairly long graphic novel, so I had the thing, it matched up well.
Yeah.
You know, like I had the room I needed. I didn't have to invent a lot. I had to change pacing around and make it a little more visual for the artists, but I didn't have to reinvent the wheel on that one.
Yeah. It's because you said some of them have been books though that then you've written yourself, yeah, right? That then you adapted. I believe the one with Stan Lee one, wasn't that one?
The Stan Lee books, that was a series of original middle grade novels. Yep. Those were new, based on creations from Stan through his company POW Entertainment. And yeah, that was through Disney, which handled the whole thing. Yeah, those were a lot of fun. And working with Stan was amazing. So
yeah. So for you, you've dabbled in so much with, and I don't even want to say dabble because it makes like, but you've done so much work with, writing and that style of, is there something that you gravitate towards, like writing a book or adapting a book or just writing a comic? Is there something where you're like, this is my wheelhouse that I love?
Well, I like jumping around from comics. I like jumping around from one genre to the next. I like jumping around. I gravitate towards science fiction more than anything else, I think. But like the Marvel novels I'm reading now for Aconite, the first one was out last year. It's called Target Kree, and they're tied into the Marvel Crisis Protocol game, which is a collectible miniatures game. But they're really just, the novels are really just like big, giant, like Thanos movie level stories, involving a lot of the big characters. And those are really hard to write, but they're really fun. And the first one was Target Kree. I needed a breather. So the second one is called Shadow Avengers, and that's written by Carrie Harris. And I'm working on the third one, which is called Into the Dark Dimension, which will sort of bring the trilogy around and conclude the whole thing next May. But I will tell you, like last, just about a year ago, last fall, I had been, I think I've been working on Highball. I'd finished up Target Kree. I think we were doing the outlines for Into the Dark Dimension, actually.
Okay.
And the Wrong Earth special. And I just came back from a vacation, and I just thought, I just don't want to write anything funny. Like I've been doing all these, like Ahoy books tend to be all humor oriented in one way or another. And it was just like, I want to change. So I just sat down and wrote a crime noir graphic novel that I'm working on the side with an artist. We don't have a publisher yet. I might Kickstarter it. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
But that's fun. But yeah, but I like a change. I like to mix it up. I like to change it up. I think it keeps me fresh. I think it keeps my writing fresh, I hope.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure it's got like, it's got to be different style too. Whether you're dealing with, an existing property compared to something that you create. Is the process different of like getting into the headspace of how to create when you're, doing something of an existing like Namor, Iron Man compared to, Highball?
Yeah, very, very much so. And like writing company-owned characters is in a lot of ways easier. You have to be aware and mindful of the parameters, like the limits you can't go past, obviously. For instance, on Target Kree, I'm pretty familiar with the Marvel characters and guidelines, and I actually edited the books there for a while. But I wasn't as familiar with I had read up like pretty much the whole run of Ms. Marvel, but that's a newer character. And I wasn't aware, for instance, that they are fiercely protective of her keeping her secret identity. Like no one in the Marvel universe can know her secret identity. So that I had to do a little reworking and rewriting. So there's things like that. But on the other hand, it's a little easier because you're starting from a framework of, you know who these characters are, you know basically where they live. Often there are locations you can draw on as well. Like a lot of that book was set in Tony Stark's Long Island headquarters. Like, and there are maps, you know, they're like, and you can change them around. You can take some liberties, but yeah. But if I do something like Highball, it's all on me, and I have to make sure it's somewhat internally consistent and at least tips its hat to the laws of physics, you know, things like that. Fortunately, Fred was a really good collaborator on that because he got really into designing the costumes and how they would have communicators built in and how they would work. All this stuff that, to be honest, he was making me seem lazy. Like I hadn't even thought about a lot of it. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. Oh, that's how the ships work. Yeah, great. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Thank you. So that's the kind of collaborator that really helps on something like that.
So Fred was a reason that you were able to figure out how the Highball was able to drink through his helmet.
I just threw that at him. I said, you know, he's got some sort of apparatus. Like when they're on the ship, it's easy, you know. But when he's in his scout ship, and like, yeah, he's got something floating or something. I don't know. And I think Fred changes it up. He has a few different methods that Highball can use.
That's so cool. That's great.
And Highball is not a role model. I want to point that out to any kids who might be listening. Highball is don't be Highball.
Yes. No, don't be Highball.
Don't be Highball.
So, you know, you working on Highball series, and you know, you mentioned that you have a crime noir that you're working on right now. Is that kind of what you're focused on right now? And you're also writing a novel. I mean, like, what else? Is there anything else that you're kind of working on that we haven't touched on yet?
The Marvel novel, the new one, Into the Dark Dimension, has been taking up a lot of my time. It's okay. It's a complex story that has to sort of take in elements of the first two books while still standing on its own. It has a lot of characters. I'll be done with that pretty soon. Other than that, as I said, I do manage Ahoy's schedule and their dealings with distributors, that sort of thing. And I keep I'm sort of the hub of the wheel where everything sort of comes out for me, and so that takes up less of my time than you might think, but more of my attention in a way.
Okay.
So that's what I do when I'm not writing. Highball, I pretty much finished writing that, and I'm developing. I have a few other projects that are being developed. One with a packager on the side, and another with a publisher I've done a little bit of work for that I'm hoping to do more with.
Nice. So, I mean, obviously, it sounds like you're staying extremely busy with through the process of writing, and then what you're working with Ahoy. And I'm grateful for you taking a little bit of time talking about comics with me.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on, and I'll talk Highball. I'll talk comics anytime, but especially Highball.
I'm really excited to dig into the world of Highball a lot more. You know, because it's interesting when you're doing an interview. You know, and I've read the trades of Captain Ginger. I've read, you know, and so I've gotten the completed aspects of Bronze, you know, those and some of your other works. But it's like, oh man, I'm at the start of this one still.
Well, there will be. I should mention there will be more Captain Ginger. We're working on it a little now, so that's good.
Good. Well, I always like to just know where's the best way that people can follow along with what you're doing, what you're creating, so they are in the know.
My Twitter feed is Stuart Moore 1. That's probably the best way. I'm also Stuart Moore 1 on Facebook, and on Instagram I'm Stuart Moore 01. And I have a website that really needs to be updated, which might even be this weekend. And that's stuartmoorewriter.com.
Great. Well, all the links that Stuart just mentioned will be in the description of this video, or if you're listening via the podcast, in the description of that. Again, Stuart, thank you so much for just taking some time to talk about comics with me.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you for having me on. Let's do it again.
We'll do. Absolutely. So with that being said, gang, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out.
Yep.
Peace.